Welcome to the complete Cars handheld experience. Across several videos we have now looked at Cars for the Game Boy Advance, Cars for the DS, and for the PSP. And in this video you will find all three of those, as well as a brief look at the 3DS and PS Vita, as they both did have Cars games. So let's go from the start. The original Cars movie launched nearly 18 years ago.
I'm so old now.
As did the magical first game. The nostalgia I have for this film and this first game is just unmatched. I was about 6 years old when this came out, and my god, I loved it so much. Now I had this game on PS2, but this game is pretty much available on every single platform that was around at the time. So please bear in mind this game came out in 2006, after the DS had already launched. But for some reason, this game was also on Game Boy Advance. And not only that, Cars Made National, which came out even later, was also on the Game Boy Advance. Anyway, so that's this video. We're looking at the Game Boy Advance Cars games. They're both quite different from each other, so this should be quite an interesting look. I wasn't expecting much in the way of cutscenes, but oh my god, those are certainly some JPEGs. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, there isn't exactly much game here to review. It's very short for what it is. Even for a Game Boy Advance game, this is incredibly short. The Cars GBA port was developed by Helix, which were owned obviously by THQ. Now these guys were purely known for making Game Boy Advance and DS ports of games, so they made the Wall-E game for DS, Ratatouille for GBA and DS, The Incredibles and The Incredibles Rise of the Underminer for GBA and the latter for DS. They basically just made a bunch of tie-in hand-in games for THQ. They were working on a The Blob port for DS, which later got cancelled, sadly. But it's not bad! Anyway, so these guys were made defunct in 2008, so they've been gone for years. As you can see from the gameplay on screen, although it's not the best, please bear with me, it took me way too long to get used to the handling of the cars. Cars for the GBA is a top-down, isometric kind of racer. Now this was quite common for the Game Boy Advance, as this was quite an easy way of making a racing game. It wasn't too draining on the hardware, so it made sense that this was a top-down racer. The basic gameplay consists of you holding down the A button and using the D-pad to turn Lightning McQueen. The game will give you a warning when a turning is coming up, showing you the way you need to turn, because obviously there's no map and you can't see ahead of you that far, and then you just have to take the turn. The way the cars handle are alright, it's not too bad. It took me a lot of getting used to because I haven't played a game like this in a very long time. But for the most part, the core gameplay is completely fine. It's harmless, really. Now, Lightning himself handles quite well, but I also had the chance to play as Chick Hicks and the King. Now, Chick Hicks, for just no reason, was so ridiculously fast. He was just really unnecessarily difficult to control. And the King, being a big muscle-type S-car, was just a nightmare to turn. I believe the King is based off of a Plymouth Superbird, which I don't think was very well known for being able to turn that well, as is the case with pretty much any muscle car, so I'm not surprised, but it was just a bit over the top, I found. Okay, so in total this game has about 16 events overall, which really don't take very long to complete. Some races can last a few minutes, but most of them are lasting like a minute to a minute and a half at most, so you're only going to get an hour or two out of this. There's a few unlockable characters, as I've already discussed, and there's also some customization for Lightning McQueen. You can have him in a few different colours, including Dynaco Blue, and what I like to call Piss Yellow. Other than that, there genuinely isn't very much to say about this game. There's a couple of collectibles that you can unlock, but these collectibles are literally just screenshots from the first film in really low resolution. Anyway, let's move on to Made National. Well, be careful what you wish for, guys. I guess these cutscenes, in inverted commas, do look better than the ones from the first game, so that's fine. Anyway, this is Cars Meta National for the Game Boy Advance. Already this game is better in my eyes, just purely for the music, because the first Cars game literally only has music on the menus, not in the races or anywhere else, so it's nice to just have something to listen to other than just the sound of an engine. This game was released in 2007 and was developed by Tantalus Media, a company known for porting a lot of different games to different platforms, most notably the HD Zelda Twilight Princess for Wii U and the HD Skyward Sword for Nintendo Switch, which is pretty damn cool. More importantly, before this they worked on a game for GBA called Top Gear Rally, where they created their own in-house 3D engine, which would later be used for this game. Not to be confused by the show with the same name.
Oh no! Anyway,
whilst the sprites in the first Cars game did actually look quite nice, the 3D models of the cars used in this game, it cannot be understated how impressive these actually are considering the hardware that's being used. You can tell that a lot of effort went into these models, and they even brought in the international racers from the main console games as well, and even they look quite good, all things considered. There are a lot of characters you can choose from as well, although as always I just kept playing as McQueen for the most part, although once I started unlocking some of the international racers they were faster, so I started using those. Please bear in mind that I have been playing these games emulated on my computer. These are not totally accurate representations of what they'd actually look like on the console itself. One thing I did notice whilst playing this game full screen on a computer was I started to feel a little bit dizzy and my eyes started to struggle to focus, just with the way that they've used their 3D engine with hardware restrictions. Meant the background just looked really funny and my eyes just couldn't concentrate on it. It was a very weird experience. So that horrendous sound you just heard was the sound of the boost pickup, and oh my god, it jump scared me the first time I used it. This game plays very much so like a rally game, in that it shows you and flags up what the turning coming up is, although the visibility of the corners is a lot better in this than it is in the first Cars game. The cars all handle pretty well. I had a much better time driving in this game than I did in the first game, but that might just be down to the fact that I've not really played that many isometric races, and every time I have, I've been absolutely dog shit at them. But I'm still going to complain anyway. Whilst in the first Cars game, there was a very big difference in handling for the few characters I played as. They were just so ridiculous that it just made the game unplayable for me, whereas in this, the cars do handle slightly differently, but it's not so, like, obnoxious that you don't want to play as that character. It's just a nice subtle change where the playing as different characters feels ever so slightly different, but not so challenging to the point where you can't play it. Whilst this game certainly has more content than the first Cars GBA game, the issue with the content here is it's just so damn easy. I found the first Cars game more hard, but that just might be down to the fact that I can't play isometric races well at all. But in this game, once you basically get past the pack at the start, you won't see anyone else for the rest of the race unless you fuck up so badly that you stop for like a good 10-20 seconds. And the issue is, it's like that the entire way through. When you finish the main game, you do unlock an expert mode, but you could basically just start at the expert mode and you still wouldn't really notice much of a challenge. If you mess up, they will overtake you, but if you just drive, then you're still just going to win anyway. It's not particularly challenging. Which is such a shame, because they worked so hard on this really cool engine, creating all the cars' characters, for the game to just be a bit of a snooze fest, really. Okay, so the first Cars game on Metacritic has a very, very middle score of 50 out of 100, which really isn't great. Now, Cars Meta National actually doesn't have any Game Boy Advance reviews on Metacritic, and that's probably because this was one of the last Game Boy games ever produced in 2007, so we'll base it off the DS version, which I believe is just a better version of the GBA. So they've reviewed the DS version at 69 out of 100. Very nice. I would imagine the GBA score would be sat somewhere around the 60 to 70 mark anyway, so that's what we're going with. It was genuinely really hard to find any kind of official review for the Game Boy Advance version, so we're just kind of having to base it off of public opinion. And the general consensus is that Meta National for the Game Boy Advance is a lot better than the first Cars game for Game Boy Advance. However, this is obviously a very, very niche topic of conversation, so it's even hard just to find those conversations going on. Anyway, that takes us to the end of our look at the Cars Gameboy Advance ports. These games are both interesting in their own way, but Meta National is definitely the better of the two. What do you guys think? Did you own these games? Did you enjoy them? Let me know in the comments down below.
Holy God, what are you showing me? His head. Come on!
Okay, so now we have looked at so many different aspects of Cars video games. From MMOs, to GBA ports, to just the truly terrible. Today we are looking at the 4 Cars video games made for the Nintendo DS, which are Cars, Cars Meta National, Cars Race-O-Rama, and Cars 2. This is quite a mixed bag, so get ready for an interesting look at these 4 quite different games. Do you guys enjoy Cars games for the racing? Well, too fucking bad, bozo, because this is a mini-game collection. That's right, the first Cars game for the DS is a fucking mini-game collection. Barely any racing in sight. This version of the game launched worldwide around the same time as all the others did back in June or July 2006, depending on where you were in the world. This version was developed by Helix, who also develops the GBA version of the game that we looked at the other week. I mean, honestly, I'm not actually surprised this does exist, because this was the early days of the DS when everything was about making sure you used the touch controls, and minigame collections were a big thing back then, so I'm not surprised, I'm just kind of disappointed. Well, seeing as we're here, let's just talk about the minigames that this offers. So, the one you're currently seeing on screen is a game where you have to, and I quote here, stroke the cars as they fill up petrol to keep them happy. That's right, stroke the cars.
What the hell?
You have to quickly tap between the different petrol pumps to make sure you stroke as many cars as possible. I'm really struggling not to burst out laughing whilst reading this, but it's just silly. It's alright, it works, it's just pointless. So next up we have a kind of driving segment where you have to play as that orange muscle car from the start of the first film, who I believe is childishly called Snot Rod. Anyway, you just kind of keep driving, he occasionally sneezes and gets a boost, and the other members of your crew drive past and you have to avoid them. I don't really get the point of the game, and then you kind of just keep driving until you stop. And this one just feels like it goes on for fucking ages as well. Not impressed. So the third minigame I played, it's literally just a memory game. Like, that's it.
I remember this. Almost remember.
There's a traffic light that flashes in different patterns, and you just have to tap the traffic light after the lights have flashed. The only really annoying thing is as the game goes on, the patterns get longer, but the traffic light shakes as you tap it, so sometimes you can misclick on the screen. And I say misclick because I've been emulating this and not been playing it on an actual DS. So it just made it 10 times more difficult. So once you complete these first 3 minigames, you then unlock some more. So the way these minigames work is they have 3 stages. If you fail at a stage, it will just take you back to that stage rather than restarting the entire thing, which is kind of nice, I suppose. Anyway, so the next thing you unlock is an actual race between Lightning and Chick Hicks. Now, I thought, oh hell yeah, racing, this is going to be good. No, it's a very bare bones experience. I was just happy to see some kind of racing, but be careful what you wish for, I suppose. The concept for this one was actually pretty cool. You have to keep an eye on your tyres to make sure they don't burst. You have a boost gauge that keeps coming and going as you use it, and there is actually a pit stop micro game halfway through the race, although I struggled to actually figure it out at first, which is really embarrassing. But yeah, overall, not a great minigame, but it's fine. Okay, so next up we have a minigame where Mac is driving along and falling asleep once again, which is just super dangerous. Anyway, his rear end opens, oh god, and Lightning's trophies start pouring out, and there's 4 different colours of trophies that pour out, and you have to grab them and move them into the... let's try that again. You have to move them into the corresponding colours. This just goes on for quite a while as well, and the game does have a countdown each round, but like, it always hits 0 and there's still trophies coming. I think the game just ends when it runs out of trophies. There are 2 other minigames that I played during my brief time with Cars for the DS, both of which starred my favourite character of all time, haha, Mater. One sees Mater trying to shoot himself up to the moon by driving very fast and also collecting stars for some reason, and the other sees Mater fishing trash out of the river. I'm not even going to waste time diving into these 2 games because they're just so inherently boring that there's nothing interesting to say about them. And that was all the time I spent playing the first Cars game, so let's move on to something a bit more interesting. Cars Mater National.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, nah, can't take any more of that cursed cutscene. Anyway, this is Mater National for the DS, developed by Tantalus Interactive, who also developed the Gameboy Advance port of this game. If you remember, I was quite impressed by the GBA version, and I have to say I am also very impressed with this one. The GBA version is just a dumbed down version of this DS game. They even managed to put that cursed opening cutscene in as an actual CGI cutscene, rather than just some JPEG images with some text underneath. Don't get me wrong, most of the other cutscenes in this game are just images of characters with text, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not expecting a fully animated story mode game for the DS. Anyway, this launched in late 2007, and the DS version actually had the highest Metacritic score out of the lot, with a very nice 69 out of 100.
Oh, yeah.
For comparison, the DS version of the first Cars game only got a 54 out of 100, which is just pathetic. Now, so far, my only experiences with Mater National have been on the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS, so I don't really have the main game to compare to. Now, I have looked into it, and to be honest, this game seems quite similar to that, minus the open world aspect. The tracks for this game are actually very well designed, there's some cool hidden shortcuts and collectibles to pick up, and honestly, I had a really good time playing this game. It features all the international racers from the main game and who we also saw pop up in the GBA version. There's jumping, there's drift mechanics. Honestly, this game is pretty good. Don't get me wrong, it's still pretty easy, but it's not as easy as the GBA version was. One thing I do have to say though is the model for Lightning McQueen in this game, much like the one on the GBA, is just absolutely fucking cursed. It is cooked beyond belief.
Holy God, what are you showing me? His head. Come on.
Now, whilst I will sing this game's praises, there are also parts, as with a lot of games, that just are far from perfect. There's a couple of courses where the handling feels a bit off and you can very easily fall off the side of a canyon, which I did lots of times because I'm just a really bad driver. But there's also a segment where you have to race Goodmund, and it's at night in a cave. So because McQueen is so cocky and actually has stickers instead of headlights, the player now has to suffer as he wears fucking night vision goggles, which means the whole screen is this awful colour of green for the entire race. I get the idea was kind of cool, I suppose, but in reality it was just garbage. I won't lie, it was the only part of this game that I really did not enjoy. Overall though, Cars Mater National for the DS is a very good game. It's easy, yes it's aimed at kids, but in terms of races on the DS, this is definitely up there with Mario Kart DS for sure. Anyway, that takes us nicely along to our next game in this video, Cars Race-O-Rama. Genuinely, I can't decide which McQueen model I actually hate the most between Mater National and Race-O-Rama for the DS. This game just, I couldn't get used to the way it looks. But more on that later. So this is Cars Race-O-Rama for the Nintendo DS, which was developed by, again, Tantalus. It released in late 2009, and Race-O-Rama actually holds the honour of being the first Cars game I actually made a video on, so I know a lot more about this one than I did Meta National. Now, as you may recall, I absolutely grilled Racerama the first time I played it and did the video. Now, hindsight has given me some wonderful, wonderful knowledge in the fact that it wasn't that bad. This, on the other hand, is nowhere near on the same level as the console game is. Obviously, it was never going to be, but it's just something about the way this game looks. It just, I don't know, I can't get on board with it. I don't know how they went from the Meta National graphics to whatever Lightning McQueen looks like here. Now, as you can probably tell from that recycled Chick Hicks joke that I've used in nearly every single Cars video, yeah, f*** you guys, I'm going to keep doing it anyway. The story still is the same as the base game. Chick Hicks' rival racing academy takes yours on. He has some bratty sports car girl, a silent muscle car, a big truck that's voiced by Randy Savage, although there's no actual voiceover in the cutscenes in this game. The bare bones of the game is still there. The tracks are all nicely designed, it has shortcuts, there's stuff to collect, you know the gist by now. As it's developed by Tantalus, this game is very similar to Meta National, and that's a good thing. I personally prefer Meta National over this one as a handheld game, just from the way it looks and the way it runs. Honestly, Meta National runs better than this one. That said, some of the level design is a bit more detailed. There are some reflections that can be seen on the models of the cars, which is actually quite impressive for the kind of game this is and for the platform it's on. But overall, I much prefer Meta National to this. However, Tantalus still did a good job of bringing this game to a handheld platform. I must say the points mechanic in this game is really cool. How you hit top speed, you get points which add up to your boost, how you hit drifts, and just that whole system it's very well done. Obviously it was in Cars Racerama, but it's done very well on the DS as well. Honestly, I'm just grateful that these two games exist, because the first Cars game on DS is just a joke. So the fact that we got two full console games pretty well adapted onto the DS is very impressive. So technically, in terms of Metacritic review gatherings, the DS version of Racerama actually holds the highest score out of all the games so far, but that's only because it's had one review, and that one review was 70 out of 100. For comparison, the 360 and PS3 versions of the game hold 54 and 61 out of 100 respectively. Anyway, moving on to our final game, Cars 2. Okay, so last but not quite least, we have Cars 2. Now, this DS port was actually developed by Avalanche, who developed all the other versions of the game as well. I recently played through Cars 2 on the channel about a month ago, and I had a pretty high expectation for this game to be quite similar, having just played the previous two DS ports as well. What I got was in fact not a port of the console game, but in fact its own thing. Honestly, I've sat on this for a few days now, and I still don't quite know how I feel about this game. It's such a mixed bag that it's hard to really recommend it, but at the same time, it's weirdly impressive for what they were trying to do.
I don't know.
So let me just elaborate on what I mean. The console game very, very loosely follows the events of the film, but it's kind of just you doing missions and races with no real actual purpose except to just progress further through the levels. This game actually follows the plot of the film, where there are actual missions based on such insignificant moments. There's a whole segment on Meta driving to get to the wasabi for the pistachio ice cream joke.
Do not eat the free pistachio ice cream. It has turned.
Don't get me wrong, what follows is a pretty significant moment in the film with the oil spill, which to me overall is quite impressive, but it does mean that there are some incredibly boring and frustrating segments of gameplay involving stealth and almost platforming. I don't know, man. Honestly, I was just hoping for a bit more of a watered down version of the console game, but this is just weird. I do just want to talk about how the cars handle in this game compared to previous as well. Now obviously I know this was developed by a different developer, so the handling is going to be different, but my god, controlling Lightning, he is so sensitive to drive around, it's absolutely ridiculous. Perhaps I just didn't play the game long enough to get used to it, but I just found it very difficult to control what he's doing when you press the D-pad and he just turns on an instant. Very sharply as well, might I add. Anyway, let's talk reviews for this game. So the overall Metacritic score for the DS version is 58 out of 100, but there's such a mixed bag of reviews here. They range from 80 all the way down to 41. Some people absolutely despise this game, where other people are really impressed with what it did. I'm more on the negative side. It's definitely got a fair review score, I'd say, overall, but I wasn't particularly impressed, I must say. This again suffers from the same problem as the first Cars DS game, where I want racing in my Cars game. I don't think that's so much to ask. At least that is actually here, but it is just broken up by loads of random segments of...
So, you know, mixed, let's call it mixed reviews.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of our look through the Cars games for the Nintendo DS.
You talked up a lot of cars last night. Which one's your associate?
Your mother. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was your sister. You know, I can't tell them apart these days.
Hello? The road? It's for racing, not parking.
It's time to look at Cars games on the PSP. We've looked at Cars on the Game Boy Advance, Cars on the DS, Cars MMOs, and even, of course, the home console releases. Although not all of them yet, I do know this, I am getting to them. Cledge will literally do anything but play Cars and Cars Made International for any home console. Anyways, there were 3 different Cars games released for the PlayStation Portable, and I have had the pleasure of playing through all 3 of them. And I use the word pleasure very loosely, because I enjoyed like 1.5 of them, and absolutely despised 1. As always, I think this is going to be another mixed bag of a video in terms of my likes and dislikes. Anyway, so first up we have Cars for the PSP, released in summer 2006. Now, this game is already notable because it's the only game out of all the versions of this that did not feature Owen Wilson. This has Keith Ferguson voicing Lightning McQueen. The other actors from the original movie do voice their characters in this game. One thing I will say straight away about this game is the menu music goes so hard. So, Cars on PSP follows a different story to the home console version. The residents of Radiator Springs are all racing when Lightning turns a corner and finds the import racers from the start of the first film, also known as the delinquent road hazards, apparently. Anyway, these 4 racers were quite literally the epitome of cool in the 2000s for me. Like, I thought every car should look exactly like those 4. Anyway, spoiler alert, these 4 actually have a secret leader. Now, can you think of a certain Cars antagonist that could possibly lead these 4 racers to cause havoc for Lightning McQueen? I wonder. You guys know damn well I'm going to take every opportunity I can to make that stupid joke. That's right, as you play through the game, you find out that they are led by none other than Chick Hicks. Yay, he's back again. Now, I'm just going to say it right out, I really enjoyed Cars for PSP. Is it a perfect game? No. But there was a lot of effort put in. This version of Cars was developed by Locomotive Games, formerly known as Pacific Coast Power and Light. These guys developed Nuclear Strike and Road Rash 64 for the Nintendo 64, and then went on to develop some MX games, and then later on Cars and Ratatouille for the PSP. They were bought out by THQ in 1999, and then were shut down by them in 2008. But then THQ obviously went bankrupt as well, so I guess karma's a bitch, really. Anyway, whilst I love the tracks on the original Cars home console game, some of the tracks on the handheld version were just super creative and not what I was expecting from this game. As to be expected with a lot of these games, there's a lot of cool shortcuts, but also just some incredible designs all round. There's one level called Iron Horse Junction, which is basically just a train yard, and it's just, I don't know, it was just really captivating for me, and it was something different compared to what I was used to, even if there were loads of those f***ers from Chuggington taunting me every time I went past them. There are some other cool tracks as well, including one where you end up driving through a bowling alley and then you can get a strike each time you go through, which I thought was quite a nice touch, even if the game doesn't actually show you the pins falling over. probably due to technical limitations. The game is broken up into a few segments, so you'll do a couple of races and then you'll get a boss fight between one of the 4 of the gang. You'll get a little cutscene before and a little cutscene after you win, then a few more races, rinse and repeat, all the way through until you get to the final showdown with Chick Hicks, which was actually quite a cool race, I'm not gonna lie. There have definitely been worse races between you and Chick Hicks, and I'm looking at you, Cars for the DS, I'm looking at you. Now, don't get me wrong, whilst I did enjoy this game, it is by no means a perfect game either. It has the standard kind of janky physics you've come to expect from the early Cars games, so if you're like me and you don't like those, then this game might start to wind you up a little bit. If you do like them, then good for you I suppose, because you'll enjoy it a lot more. On top of that, it also suffers from the other problem you tend to see in some of the other games, like how the f*** is Lizzie pulling away from you at the start of the race, and somehow still keeping ahead of you, going at like 200 miles per hour. It's also not a particularly long game either, but this was a handheld movie tie-in for the PSP, so I don't know what I was expecting really. But in the grand scheme of things, for a decent Cars game, these are pretty minor gripes to have. If you're looking to purchase an arcade racer for your PSP, I probably wouldn't recommend Cars as your first choice, with games like Burnout Legends and Ridge Racer on there as well. But if you're looking for Cars for your PSP, this is probably the best out of the 3 you can get. The Metacritic score for this game on PSP is 70 out of 100, with review scores ranging from 88 all the way down to 50. Now, I don't really quite understand how this game's earned a 50, I would definitely say the 70 range is where it should be. I must say I had a nice little nostalgia trip when I realised you could look at clips from the film. I scrolled all the way through and found an absolute gem hidden away. Yep, the Cars game featured clips from the movie, but also a trailer for Ratatouille. Just a cool random little piece of history, I guess. Anyway, on to our next game. Okay, so for our second Cars game on the PSP, we have Race-O-Rama. Now, this version is basically the same as the DS version, just a little bit more high-res. This game was developed by Tantalus Media, who also developed Cars International for the Game Boy and the DS, and then this for DS as well. Now, this is the third time that I've played through Race-O-Rama on this channel, albeit for a different platform, but still. My opinion of this game has definitely increased over time, especially for the home console version. Anyway, I'm going to make a point that I made in the DS video on this game as well, is that it just doesn't look very nice. I thought the first Cars game for the PSP actually looks quite good, considering the time it was released and the platform it was on. But Race-O-Rama on this console just does not look pretty at all, it's very pixely. Now I know that art style was used primarily because I assumed they prioritized the DS version first, and this was in the same engine as Meta National on DS, so I'm not surprised, but it's just not very pretty to look at. Now, once again, this game does follow the same story as the home console and DS version. It does feature the cutscenes from that game as well, which is really nice. Just this once, I thought I'd spare you from the Chick Hicks joke that's literally in the opening cutscene of the game, so you guys are welcome. Anyway, so driving-wise, McQueen handles just fine, the game plays fine. That's basically all I can really say. It's easier to control than the DS version, simply for the fact that you aren't using a D-pad this time, you actually have an analog stick that you can move around. Yes, the game looks better than the DS version, but it still doesn't look great, but you can see that Tantalus did put a lot of work into this, so I'm not going to grill them too hard. As I've said before, there's a lot of tracks in this game, and they are all actually pretty good. There's some decent shortcuts, there's some collectibles to get. It's the standard experience that we actually really enjoy. There isn't really much else that I can say about Race-O-Rama for the PSP that hasn't already been said by me in another video or by someone else in a different video. Yes, it has Candace saying daddy in a cringe way. Yes, it has El Machismo voiced by Randy Savage. It's the standard beats that you know I love to make jokes about. Now, much like the DS version, Race-O-Rama doesn't have an official Metacritic score because it only has one official critic review. And that is 50 out of 100, which I don't think is a particularly fair review. I would say around the mid-60s to 70 mark would be acceptable for this game, but that's just me. I'm still going to complain about it anyway. One thing I failed to mention about the handheld version of Race-O-Rama is how much I actually quite like the last race. Now, I know I said this about the previous Cars game as well, but this Chick Hicks race is actually pretty cool. Unlike the home console version, it's a pure one-on-one with Chick. except he gets members of his crew to try and intervene and stop you as you go around, including Candice, El Machismo, and Stinger, the characters you have to race before Chick. Don't get me wrong, it's not exactly a masterclass in arcade racing, but I thought it was a very cool end to what is a fairly decent game for the PSP. Anyway, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Cars Racer-Rama, so let's get on to what I can only describe as the worst Cars game for PSP, Cars 2.
I don't want to go. Speed. I am speed.
How dare this version of the game use that incredible piece of music. Also, I love how blatant the dialogue doesn't match up to Lightning McQueen's mouth moving. Anyway, Cars 2 for PSP was developed by Virtual Toys. Also, I know in the DS video I credited the wrong developer with that game, so I am really sorry. Anyway, this version of the game launched late in 2011 as compared to all the other versions releasing in the summer. I'm so glad that we waited the longest for the worst version. So I was singing the praises of Cars 2 for home consoles, and to be honest with you, I kinda like the ambition behind the DS version as well, but by God, this is quite possibly one of the most boring games I've ever played in my entire life. We had two pretty good arcade racing games in the Cars series for PSP, and this developer decided the best direction to take this series in was a f***ing slot racer. I'd rather spend hundreds on actually buying Scalextrics in real life than play a slot racing Cars game for my PSP. The worst part is, this game literally pranks you into thinking it's quite similar to the home console versions. You have the same menu and the same vibes right as you start, and then suddenly, bam, slot racer. Anyway, now I've complained about the genre of racing this game is it actually any good at being a slot racer? Yeah, kind of, I guess. It's fine, it functions well enough. It is a bit goofy and sometimes the mechanics just don't work how they're intended. But I guess they achieved what they set out to do, which was to create a Cars slot racing game. I don't know about you guys, but I'd honestly take Cars 1 for the Gameboy Advance over this shit. Graphically, this game just looks fine, I guess. I personally think the first Cars game on PSP is the best looking out of the three. This game just doesn't look quite right to me. They kind of copied the art style from the home console versions, but it just doesn't look anywhere near as good. And that's probably just down to the console it's on, but I don't know. It's not for me. The game follows the same basic structure as the home console version. It's just a shame that it turned out the way it has, because it just could have been so much better. I honestly would have preferred it if this game was just a port of the DS one. I mean, if you like slot racing games, then this is definitely worth checking out, but it's just such a disappointment compared to basically every other game in the series. Anyway, on Metacritic, this game literally has 3 reviews. 2 of them give it 60 out of 100, and 1 of them gives it 65. Now, obviously, because of my distaste for the genre, I'm a bit biased, and probably think it should be lower, but I guess 60 seems about fair for what it is, because at least the game still functions. The other 2 games in this video I actually played through in its entirety, but this I could barely stomach for about an hour before I just gave up, because I'd already seen all that the game had to offer. At the end of the day, this is only my opinion, so take what I say with a pinch of salt. If you enjoy this game, then good for you, that's great. The same goes for any of the other Cars games I've moaned about throughout these videos. If you like them, then good, because they're meant to be liked, that's the point. Anyway, that covers the 3 Cars PSP releases. What do you guys think of these games? Have you played them? And if you have, do you have a favourite of the PSP releases? Please let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so next up, we have to very quickly talk about the PlayStation Vita, the sequel to the handheld that is the PSP. Now, there were no new Cars games developed for this console, although I would have thought a port of Cars 2 would have ended up on here. This was not the case. However, a Disney Mega Pack was released for the PlayStation Vita and included 6 games: Up, Toy Story 3, Ratatouille, Mickey's Wild Adventure, Epic Mickey 2, and Cars. Now, this Cars was a port of the PSP version. Just take a quick look at this trailer, as this is pretty much the only thing I could find on this port.
value.
Anyway, yeah, that's the PlayStation Vita cars. It's really nothing exciting at all. I was hoping to be able to say more about this, but it's just the PSP game I already like on the sequel to the PSP, so what more is there to say? And finally, that takes us to the 3DS. So, the only Cars game made for the 3DS is Cars 2. Now, Cars 2 was also made for the DS, so this game is literally just a slightly enhanced version of that. It's fundamentally the exact same game, except graphically it looks a bit nicer, and controls-wise it's a little smoother. The only reason it's smoother is because the 3DS does not use the D-pad to control the car. That's literally it. There's not really much else to say about this game. It's still the Cars 2 handheld DS game we already know. I don't want to say know and love because that's not the case, but at least it's better than Cars 2 PSP. But, to be honest with you, that's literally all there is to say about it. It's just the same game for 3DS, a little bit nicer. So I guess if you want to play Cars 2 for the DS, just play the 3DS version, because at least it'll be a bit more bearable. Now, if you made it this far into the video, then congratulations, because this is beyond the 40-minute mark. And if you did make it this far, please comment down below saying Kledge hates Mater. Because it's true, I do. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it, subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications for future uploads. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Say it with me.